Okay, I'm live, I think. Well, hello friends. Welcome back to SerenityOS Office Hours. Let's see if you can hear and see me, but usually it works. Hello, all right. Hi, how's it going? Yes, okay, signs of life, perfect. Okay, great. So it is Friday, and we're gonna do what we always do, and talk about SerenityOS. So if anybody has questions or something you would like to know more about, this is a great time to ask. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. I do see that there is a question already queued up here from Yuval, who says, "Hi Andreas, I have a question about C++ programming. Does the preprocessor function have an advantage in performance, or do you just use them for convenient purpose?" Aha. So the preprocessor is really like a copy and paste thing. Like it literally just copies and pastes code for you. So it's as if you wrote it out yourself. The preprocessor is just really good at sort of repetitive stuff. So if you have something that you want to write 100 times, but you don't actually want to write it out 100 times, preprocessor macros are great for that. But everything that the preprocessor can do, you can also do manually, I'm pretty sure. So it has no real performance advantage. It's more like the advantage is that you don't have to repeat yourself, and you can simplify things that would otherwise become a lot of code. And of course, the preprocessor also allows you to say, oh, on this platform do this, on this other platform do that. Let's see. Nick Vanninger says, "Holy moly, my first time I really caught the office hours because I'm in France for a conference." Well, welcome to France. Hope you are enjoying it. I have been to France exactly one time for a quick plane change at the airport, but the food at the airport was nice. Hey Mohammed, how's it going? DJ Wisdom says, "Hi Andreas, how are you doing?" I'm fine, thank you. Quick question. How does SerenityOS handle font sizes like 8, 10, 12 in font editor? I see presentation size. Does it control the size of the font? So font sizes in SerenityOS are a little bit of a mess. If you're using TrueType fonts, we will just respect the EM size of the TrueType font. So like the size of the M box, basically. But for our own custom bitmap fonts, we give them this number called the presentation size, but it's not completely clear what that refers to. I think originally, when I made the very first font, it was the presentation size was just like the height of the glyph. So basically like the height of the tallest possible glyph. But then I added a baseline support to the fonts, and so at that point it became unclear if the size was now like the distance from the baseline to the tallest ascender, or if it was more like the mbox in TrueType. And it's also a little bit unclear if it's pixels or points. Yeah, the presentation size is really like basically a bunch of nonsense, and what we should really be doing is moving towards something like what TrueType does or OpenType does, where they just have precise metrics for every font, so that we would be able to say, oh, this font is like it goes this high above the baseline and this low below the baseline, and the various other metrics as well. Then DJ Wisdom says, "Thanks for the font answer. Font standardization in the offing, perhaps." Well, I don't know about standardization, but we can definitely improve our own format so that it's able to. Because one problem I've had when working on the web engine in particular is CSS wants to use various font metrics for layout. And it gets really awkward with our bitmap fonts because we can't provide all of the metrics that CSS wants. In particular, CSS makes use of the line gap metric, and we don't have anything like the line gap metric. So at the moment, we just sort of approximate the line gap to, I think, 40% of the glyph height, but it would be much nicer if every font had the ability to specify a preferred line gap and so on. And it's like a whole big area where our fonts are really bare bones and they don't tell you so much about themselves. And it would be really nice if we could expand the format so that the fonts could contain more metric information, basically. Entrees says, people used to use the preprocessor to code min and max functions for performance reasons, but this is considered bad practice nowadays. Well, I think it's ultimately using macros for anything can usually be worse in C, because in C++ you can do inline functions and generic inline functions. And the problem with the macro, the typical problem with the macro is that you don't know it at the call site, but whatever you pass into the macro as an argument may be evaluated more than once, right? Because the macro might expand to something that evaluates its inputs multiple times. What I mean by that is if you have a macro that looks like this, macro, and then maybe it will do like A plus A, say. Now, if you're just doing something simple, like, then that's not that weird, but because obviously this will just work as you would expect. But imagine that you put a function call here, so get value, right? And imagine we have a function called get value that returns something. But the problem here now is that get value will be called twice, and that may not be what you expect and not something that your program is set up to handle. So that is a really good reason to use inline functions instead. But for something like min and max functions, there's really no reason to not use an inline generic function instead. Let's see. Vishnu says, I saw some language server-like code for Hack Studio. Does it actually support the official LSP, or is it a custom one? It's a custom protocol. So our language servers use our own IPC system, and they speak a custom protocol. So we don't support like plugging in arbitrary language servers. It's just called language server because everything in our system is called something server. Demonic Savage says, has anyone ever demonstrated interest in GNU/SerenityOS, as in porting the GNU user space to the SerenityOS kernel? Well, I don't know what you mean by demonstrated interest. People have joked about it many times. I don't know if that counts as demonstrating interest, but if it does, then yes, people joke about that frequently. There was also, this week, there was a patch to make to add a port of GNU core utils. So I guess that's part of the GNU userland, right? So let's try it out. I haven't tried to build it myself. Let's build it and see what happens. So, you know, you can already build GCC, bin utils, and apparently now also core utils. So if you wanted to, you can definitely make yourself like a little GNU userland on Serenity. I don't know why you would want to do that, because in my view, it's like, what is really fun about building yet another GNU userland plus random kernel thing? I mean, there are so many of these, and there's nothing particularly interesting about doing yet another one. But, you know, everybody has different interests. So just because something is not interesting to me doesn't mean that it doesn't, it's not awesome to somebody else. So apparently that built. Let's try it out. Oh, have to get rid of my macro. Macro with a K. Let's see. Skyrising said that in this case, macro 2 times 2 is not what you would expect. Yes, that's also not what I would expect. That's a good point. So I don't know where they actually installed. I assume that they went into user local somewhere. User local bin. LS maybe? Is this a GNU LS? Seems like it is. Okay, so let's list with color. Pretty cool. GNU LS. Yeah, so, little by little, slowly but surely, we are apparently offering the support for GNU userland. But it's not something I want to use, but it's probably fun for people. The middle says, hi, do you plan on going on with browser speed improvement like Discord series? I don't have a plan for anything in particular, but the browser definitely needs speed improvement, so it's something that somebody has to do, and probably I will do some of it. Electric Milk says, I noticed there are no videos of you speaking Swedish. Is this just how you feel comfortable speaking online, English being a universal language, or do you prefer for some other reason? Just curious. Well, the main reason that I speak English online is because then I can reach thousands of people. If I speak Swedish, I will reach maybe hundreds of people. And it's just a lot more practical. But even if all of you spoke Swedish or understood it, I would probably still use English because it's just a language that I'm more comfortable with at this point in my life, because I've been living online and in the programming sphere for so many years, and we just speak English about programming, right? Everything that I've read about programming, everything I learned about programming, like all these resources, all my vocabulary about technical stuff is in English. I have some very, very outdated computer programming vocabulary in Swedish, and it's atrocious. And it's actually, last time I was applying for a job in Sweden, that was the thing I dreaded the most. Like now I have to explain programming concepts in Swedish. But then thankfully, I ended up working on a team with a guy from Iran, and he didn't speak Swedish, so I got to use English at work. But yes, I'm perfectly fine speaking Swedish. Obviously, it's my native language. English is a second language for me, but I'm so used to speaking English that I just do it automatically. Let's see. Yeppydev says, a bit unrelated, but have you ever tried emulating Serenity on a phone using an emulator? I have not. That sounds really slow. Jones Oscar says, hi, I have a question about exceptions in C++. I see you are not using them in the codebase. Android also bans exceptions for the C++ part. What's your opinion about exceptions for error handling? My opinion about exceptions for error handling is that they obfuscate the control flow and introduce unnecessary overhead, both cognitive and size and speed-wise. And I think that the little value that they add in terms of like the simplicity that they add of being able to throw yourself out of any situation and just let the program unwind, it's not worth the dramatic increase in cognitive burden that comes with programs having to be written in a way that accounts for exceptions handling. Olino says, hi Andreas, glad to see you finally crossed the 33K mark. The 33K mark. Oh, that's my YouTube subscribers? Yes, I suppose I did. I'm almost 33.1. Let me actually look that up. 33,067 subscribers. That's a lot of people. Oh man, I remember when I had like 200 subscribers, I would count each one. It would be like 201, 202. Oh my god, 203. And then at some point, I stopped looking because it was just it was hard to, like, once I started looking at that kind of thing, it was hard to do anything else. I would just look at the number and think, what can I do to make the number go up? And I don't think that was a very healthy mindset. And then Olino said, have you considered having a Rust C port to Serenity? And if so, could user space use Rust in Serenity? I have considered many things. I have considered having a Rust C port. I have considered implementing it myself, and then I considered not doing it because I'm not really interested in it. And then I considered waiting for somebody else to do it if they want to, and decided that that's going to be my strategy. If anybody wants something to happen in Serenity, basically it's up to them to make it happen. And that's just one of thousands of things that I have considered and decided that I'm not super interested, but if somebody else wants to do it, they are welcome to do so. Yuval says, I saw many of your videos about profiling and improving performance of apps on SerenityOS. In many of them, you change functions to be inline functions. Does that have any performance advantage? Yes, absolutely. But there are some performance pitfalls with inline functions as well. But basically, the two main advantages from making something inline is that if you have a function that calls another function, so say that you do something like this. So we have a loop here that's going to go, I don't know, many times, let's say. That many times. Also, maybe I should name my variable there. And then we do something heavy lifting. Let's say we do a lot of heavy lifting here. And heavy lifting is some function that lives somewhere else. And it does heavy shit, right? So it does a bunch of heavy shit. And this here can be pretty slow, especially because we have to make function calls. So we have to like push the current instruction pointer and then jump to the address of this function. And then when this thing finishes, it has to pop the return address from the stack and jump back to here. So you get all of these extra instructions executing just for jumping in and out of that function. And the first big benefit of inlining is that you get rid of that overhead. So if you mark this thing inline, and let's imagine that the compiler just listens to this. It doesn't have to, but let's just imagine that it does in this case, and it becomes inlined, then now you no longer have the overhead of entering and exiting that function. So that's one thing that melts off. Another thing that can be really useful is if you have some parameters that you're passing to this function. So say that you're passing I, right? And let's say that this thing takes an int here. Now, when this is not inline, then we just push I on the stack and call the function. But when it is inline, then the compiler can actually, it will basically like expand this function here. So imagine that we do something with it. Like, I don't know, if I is, say that we did something really crazy, like checking if I is above this number. And this is a very strange example, but say that we were checking this, and if this happened, then we would maybe print something. So in this contrived example, we can observe here by just looking at it that this will never actually happen, right? Because it will loop to this number and then exit. But if we are making a regular call here to an out-of-line function, then the compiler has no way of telling in this context that nothing will ever happen here. So it just pushes the I on the stack and makes the call. But if you were to inline this function, then what ends up happening is basically the code looks like this instead. And if this allows the compiler's optimization passes to inspect what's going on here and maybe hopefully observe that, hey, wait a minute, this will never happen. This is dead code. And it can just eliminate both of these things and the loop becomes like this. And then if it's super duper smart, it also notices that nothing happens here. The whole thing goes away. And so inlining removes overhead from function calls, but it also allows compiler optimizations to look at the inline code and sort of try to make better optimizations because it has more context. Those are the two main things that I care about with inlining. Let's see. ECoptic says, how familiar are you with other architectures besides x86? So I worked a bunch on ARM, 32-bit and 64-bit ARM at Apple for iPhone and iPad, but not that much low-level stuff and basically no system-level stuff, so only user mode programming on those architectures. I'm not super familiar. I wrote a Spark emulator when I was, I don't know, 19 or 20. That was a lot of fun. And I've also made emulators for like Nintendo, Game Boy, stuff like that. Much older architectures. Hardcore Vibes YT has joined, becoming a channel member. Thank you very much for the support. I gotta remember to call these out. Welcome to the Golden Yak herd. Enjoy your emotes. Recha says, follow up on font presentation size. Is the value used at all in the system or should it be ignored? So presentation size is used in the system when, for example, in web content, if you ask for a font with a given size, let's take a look at how that would work. So say that we do something like this. Hello, friends. And maybe we will do something here, like font size 10px. Wait, does this not work? No, it does work. It does work. Okay. Yeah, so you see there, this is based on the presentation size. So when you're asking for different sizes, it will forward that information to the font database and it will try to give us back a font that has that presentation size. So it is used in the system. And of course, it's also used in the way that we disambiguate the different sizes. So if you switch to, wait, why is this? It's deadlocked. What's going on? That's concerning. I saw a bug about that, but I never reproduced it until now. Okay, well, should look into that at some point. Might be threading related. So the font presentation size disambiguates individual fonts here, right? So if I switch to 12, you can see that it says 12 here, and this string is sort of our way of describing this one individual font, which is part of the Katica typeface. So it's a bit annoying how we use the word font to describe a typeface, but also an individual specific font within that typeface. I know I'm very guilty of that, like just conflating those two terms. But yeah, the presentation size is used for CSS font size queries, font size lookups, and also used to disambiguate fonts. J.R. Poe says, Wikipedia says the system is written in what the authors called Serenity C++. Missed it a chance to call it Serenity. Well, I don't know if I like that. That sounds kind of goofy. Youngjin Park says, what do you think about the Mac preview feature where you press space on a file to quickly see the contents? That's Quick Look, I guess. Do you think that has a space in the Serenity UI? Yeah, I think that's a great feature. Absolutely. And I would love to see it in Serenity. Quick Look is one of those things in the macOS desktop that's it just makes sense, I think, that you can get a quick preview of any file. As long as the system knows how to show you what it is, it can throw up a preview of it. So it's something I think we should have. Yuval says, how do you feel about software Easter eggs? A bit of harmless fun or something a bit more detrimental? That's a good question. I was actually thinking about that yesterday. So I think Easter eggs are, they can be fun, but the problem is that they are not really scalable. And what I mean by that is, say that you have a small team of people, maybe 10 people, and 1 in 10 developers wants to put a funny little Easter egg into your program. And fine, now your program has 1 little Easter egg, and maybe that's all right. But say that your team grows to 100 people, and in keeping with imagining that 1 in 10 developers wants to put their funny little Easter egg in the program, with 100 developers, now you have 10 funny little Easter eggs. And you grow the team, you have 1,000 people suddenly, and now you have 100 funny little Easter eggs. In general, like jokes, memes, and Easter eggs, I feel like they don't scale, because if you put that many in, then the program just looks non-serious and silly. So it seems to me that Easter eggs are something that you can do on a small team, maybe, but ultimately I think it makes the software look worse. And I've changed my mind about this over the years. I used to be a fan of Easter eggs, but as SerenityOS has grown and more people come and join us, every now and then there's somebody who wants to put a funny little thing into the system. And from my perspective, like overseeing the whole lifetime of the project, if we had just accepted all of these funny little things, the system as a whole at this point, I think would look pretty silly and unserious, and that's not an image I want to pursue. I think it's important to have fun, of course. It's good to have fun, but I think we can have fun in ways that don't sort of distract from the purpose of the software. Instead, we can have fun in our community. We can have fun in the code, but not necessarily in ways that surface to the user. That's my opinion, I guess. Sauler, welcome to the Yak Herd as well. Thank you for supporting the channel. Let's see. CCLX says, since Rust is bootstrapped using Rust C itself, how would it be possible to port it to Serenity? Everything is possible. You just have to figure out how. Let's see. Demonic Savage says, what are your thoughts on the D language? I have not written a single line of D, and so I don't know anything about it, much less enough to have any kind of opinion about it. Lego Boy says, what languages did you use when working with Apple? So at Apple, I used C++ and Objective-C and JavaScript, I guess. Mostly C++ and JavaScript, because I was using JavaScript to write test cases. But Objective-C, whenever I had to interact with platform stuff, a lot of the Apple platform code, especially on macOS, is this old Objective-C stuff, right? Like AppKit and things like that. And it's a little bit different, a little bit fun to use, but it's not something I would choose to use for anything if I get to choose. Eric says, I experienced this display settings crash as well yesterday. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. It's a little bit suspicious. I need to take a closer look at it, but like just eyeballing it, like I noticed that, okay, well now my mouse doesn't work. What's going on here? I noticed that when the bug was happening, the thumbnails didn't show up here. So now they did, right? While those thumbnails are loading, we just show a little cat. So it was stuck with cats, which makes me wonder if the the background thread that generates those thumbnails, I feel like probably something went wrong. And there was some kind of deadlock between the main UI thread and the thumbnail thread. It's just a hunch. I don't have any evidence, but the cat pictures were a little bit of a clue, I guess. Uno says, hi, do you also use Firefox when you're not streaming? Sometimes, sure, absolutely. I switch between Firefox and Chrome, and I also have a copy of WebKit Trunk with a test browser that I use for testing stuff. But usually I switch between Firefox and Chrome, or Chromium. Let's see. Allison says, hi, Andreas, nice to see you live. Well, hello, Allison. You have been using Linux on OS 10. What sort of virtual machine you have used? I have been using Linux on OS 10? I guess. I mean, I have used... Wait, it's doing it again. And now the cats are not there. Okay. This disproves my cat theory. All right. Let's see if we can get one of those dumps. Using Linux on OS 10, yes, I have done that, but not very much. I used it, like the very first videos I posted on this YouTube channel, they were actually recorded in a virtual machine that was running on macOS. Because I didn't have a webcam originally, like a separate webcam, and I had a MacBook, and I was doing my Serenity development on another machine. But in order to record videos, I made a virtual machine on my MacBook and then recorded videos while programming inside the virtual machine. And I did that the first couple of videos until I eventually switched to another computer. And that's really my only experience using Linux on macOS. And I think I used VMware at the time. I think. I don't recall, but it was okay. It was just, I remember it was annoying because if you put the mouse in a certain place, then some VMware overlay thing would show up and just block the screen. Because I was using the free version of VMware, so I guess maybe in the pro version it doesn't do that or something. But no real opinion about it. So I just got a process list dump here. I thought we could see if display settings, we can see that both of the threads in display settings are blocked on, one is blocked on a mutex, the other is blocked on a futex. So definitely some kind of threading related issue going on here. I don't know exactly what's going on, but we should probably look into that. These issues are not always fun to look into. Let's see. T-Bin says, how hard is building an own compiler? Do you have a roadmap or a guide/resource to get started? I have no idea, but you can probably just get started. I don't have a roadmap or guide or resource or anything like that. But I think you can find that yourself pretty easily. You just go to Google and type how to build a compiler, right? And anybody who's not able to go to Google and type in how to build a compiler, if you can't do that, then you're definitely not going to be able to build a compiler. So I recommend starting there. Paul says, hello and good afternoon from Germany. Well, hello and good afternoon from Sweden. Welcome to the office hours. Guilherme says, a bad example of an Easter egg, in my opinion, was the LineageOS April Fool's joke. Okay, I don't know what that was, but I am curious now. So what was the LineageOS April Fools? I'm curious. Okay. Apologizes for late and bad taste April Fool. Oh no. So they posted this thing. You might be a victim of software counterfeiting. Tap to discover more about this. I assume that this is the thing. Or no? because that's pretty silly, kind of funny, right? That's it's like something I would do. Pretending to be this Windows Genuine Advantage thing. What was that thing? Windows WGA. I remember these pop-ups. You may be a victim of software counterfeiting. My grandpa used to get this on his computer for some reason that we never got into. I'm guessing grandpa didn't use legit Windows. Let's see. JJ says, Andreas, being a noob on open source projects and wanting to start small on problems, what do you recommend is some problems or projects that are smaller scale to get busy on contributing? Well, I don't know if any particular project is good. Like, I suppose like a really big project tends to have a lot of small problems. Like SerenityOS is a great example of this. There are a million little issues in SerenityOS that you can improve that are fundamentally little problems. It really depends on what kind of problem you would like to work on. When I was starting out in the open source world, I joined the KDE project because I really loved that there were so many different little things that I could work on. And when I would just basically go to some app in the KDE ecosystem, look for bugs or issues or stuff to work on there, fix a couple of things, and then when I felt like, okay, I've done enough here, I would just move on to a different app and look what was going on there. I really love that ability I had there to just move from app to app and find new little things to work on everywhere. I think for that reason, I really often recommend joining some kind of big project, because big projects tend to have a great variety of problems of all sizes. Whereas like a smaller, more targeted project tends to have, I mean, if you have a project that focuses very strongly on doing a specific thing, then it's less likely that they will have like this wide range of small problems, because people have already fixed that and like already took care of the low-hanging fruit. Daniel says, did you know anything about OS development when you started SerenityOS? I'd like to write a rendering engine optimized for a particular use case, but I have very little experience with graphics programming. I had some basic familiarity with operating system development because I tried to do it when I was a teenager. And if you go on Usenet, on like Google Groups or something like that, you can still find archives of my old posts when I am like 12 years old or 13, asking for help with my operating system code. And I'm just a really clueless little kid, and it's pretty adorable. But I didn't really have experience, like any serious experience with operating system development when I started Serenity, just some past dabbling as a kid. What I did have experience with was virtual machines. So I spent a lot of time building x86 emulation, and I was very familiar with x86 architecture. So making a kernel for x86 was pretty straightforward because I was used to emulating the CPU and allowing software to run on my emulated CPU. So building an operating system, building a kernel was just like flipping that over and writing the code that would run on the CPU instead of the other way around. So that helped me a lot. Zero City, or Zerocity, says, you will continue with the Discord videos? I really like the profiling stuff. I don't have a plan one way or the other, but it is very, very likely that, I mean, we will definitely continue working on Discord support. It is something that is ongoing, but I don't know when or in which order things happen, because we don't really stick to a plan here. I know that this is not news to some people, but there's always new people here every week. So I always want to mention that we don't have a plan for SerenityOS. I don't personally have a plan for anything that I do. Some people have plans for what they do, but there is no schedule or official plan or anything like that. So we kind of just see what happens. Let's see. Guilherme says, I noticed you have a lot of bash aliases. Did you make them yourself, or do you use some pre-configured framework like Oh My Bash? I made all of my aliases myself, I think. And I just have things that I've accumulated over the years. And I guess I try to think about it whenever I do something repeatedly, where I type something out. I eventually try to remind myself to make a 2 or 3 character alias for it. But I'm not a very serious shell power user. I know how to use my shell for the basics. I know how to set up aliases and make little functions and stuff, but I'm not a super power user. Zero City says, what is a Futex? A Futex is a fast user space mutex. It's a synchronization primitive that allows you to implement really fast mutexes by coordinating between kernel and user space. So it's something that we support in SerenityOS. And we have, I think, basically the same API as Linux has for their Futexes. But yeah, it's like a building block for implementing a fast mutex in user space programs. It takes care of the part in the kernel where you have to go to sleep. So if somebody else is holding a mutex that you want to grab, then you need to go to sleep, and you have to ask the kernel to put you to sleep. And a Futex is the primitive that user space can use to put itself to sleep and wait for somebody else to finish with the mutex that we're waiting on. Comfortably Numb says, will you upgrade to Ubuntu Mate 2204? Well, I don't know. I don't really have a plan, but I do have a habit of upgrading when the new LTS comes out. So based on my habit, I would assume that I would habitually update. Vishnu says, opinion on ReactOS. I don't have an opinion on ReactOS. Unlucky AF says, will you ever make OS dev tutorials? No, I don't think so. I'm not really that type of educator. I don't know what gives people this idea, but I really don't make content targeted towards beginners. And I also try to avoid making content that already exists in great quantities. And there's a lot of tutorials on like how to make an operating system or how to make a basic kernel or something like that. And you really don't need me to make yet another one. There's like 10, there's at least 10 good ones. You don't need number 11 from me. I have nothing to add that would be that special or that interesting. The only reason for me to do that would be to like generate more traffic or popularity or whatever. And that's not really something that's important to me. So it doesn't seem like a good use of time. Colin Bell says, hello from New York. Was it stressful to work on Serenity so much while still working a job? Yes, I guess it was. But it made my regular job stressful. Working on Serenity was nice and peaceful, but working on my regular job always felt stressful because I had to do my regular job with sort of the surplus energy I had, or the energy I had outside of Serenity, because my focus, even while I had a full-time job, I still focused in my head mainly on Serenity because I was just so much more interested in that. So it was very stressful to juggle both a full-time job and working on Serenity. And by far the best thing about going full-time, which I did in May of last year, has been to be able to just not stress out about juggling 2 jobs, basically. Yeah. It's been a huge increase in life quality to not feel stressed about that. Yuval says, sorry that I bug you with questions about performance. Oh, don't worry about it. I love talking about that. But maybe do you have a site or resource that explains about taking advantage of the debugger and techniques to optimize performance in C++? I don't really have a site or a resource for that. I learned most of what I know about performance. I learned from observing other people work on performance, and just from speaking with other people about it. I learned a lot from my coworkers at Apple, like my friend Antti especially, who is really, really good at using profilers to identify bottlenecks and identify suspicious things, I guess. He really taught me a lot about what to look for in a call stack, and like what is this like systematic process of going through a profile and just trying to identify, wait a minute, why is this thing here? And you try to sort of make up a justification for every entry in a profile to say like, oh, well, this needs to be here because this work needs to be done. And then by going through all of the different nodes in a profile and then trying to justify each one, it's eventually you'll come across a couple of them that you can't really justify. And those are then the things that you target. And I was just doing so much of that, sitting around with people, looking at profiles together, talking about like, oh, why does this need to be here? Why does that need to be there? It's a really fun exercise if you are a bunch of people, or even just the two of you who are very familiar with the code base, to profile the code base, like profile it doing something that you both understand sort of how it works, and then look at the profile together and just call out what you see and talk to each other about, does this match my expectations for what the program would be doing? And is there something that could we sort of rearrange these things somehow so that we could do less work? Or is there something here that looks heavy that we could maybe cache? Or all of these kind of things. But I learned very much organically and socially from sitting around with people and talking about these things and doing them together and watching other people do it. And I guess that's something that I'm really trying to put out as a resource of sorts with my channel, where I make these videos of me profiling and optimizing stuff to show you exactly the same thing that I saw and learned from like observing other people doing that. Now I'm trying to do the same, where I just show you how I do it, and then you can look at that and see, oh, so that's how you do it. I hope that makes sense. But I don't know if any like great literary resource of like, oh, here are the things you should do for performance. In my experience, whenever I see resources like that, or when I see like a blog like that, like, oh, great things to do for performance, usually they're just sort of these dogmatic lists of performance best practices that, you know, maybe they make some contrived micro example faster, but that's, in my view, that's not really what performance is about. Like, performance isn't about reducing the overhead by some minuscule percentage by like passing arguments in the most efficient way. Performance is more about, like, to me, performance is about identifying the real bottlenecks and the real hotspots in your program and making surgical but like impactful changes that dramatically improve speed or size, depending on what you're going for. I hope that makes sense. Let's see. ECoptic says, do you plan to stream next Friday? Well, ECoptic, I don't really have a plan one way or the other, but I do have a habit to stream on Fridays, so stick around and find out. Paul Fragaman says, what font are you using in C-Line? I am using the default font that comes with C-Line. It's called JetBrains Mono. If you enjoy JetBrains Mono, I know that they have a webpage about it, JetBrains Mono. Right here, jetbrains.com/ulp/mono. I didn't even know about this typeface before I started using C-Line, but since using C-Line, I have become quite fond of it, and I also set up my Mate terminal to use JetBrains Mono as well, because I just find it kind of nice to look at. Let's see. Dun dun dun. Paul says, well, the chat in your stream shows messages before my chat. That's really weird. Okay, it should be the other way around. Also, I guess I'm far behind again. Vishnu says, you have written emulators. Have you worked with HDLs like Verilog or VHDL? I haven't worked with HDLs at all. I didn't do any kind of hardware design or implementation. I am, in fact, I would say hardware is one of the areas where I feel the least knowledgeable. And it's something where I keep thinking that one day I'm gonna go and teach myself basic electronics and learn a little bit about hardware. And then I postpone it because I guess I'm not as interested in it as I would like to believe. Jones Oscar says, hi, what is your opinion about data-oriented design that lay out data in a way that lower the cache miss rate? Should we consider cache efficiency up front or only consider it for optimization purposes? I think data-oriented design can be very beneficial. I mean, there are tons of examples of data-oriented design speeding up processing intensive tasks. I do think that some people, like all kinds of things like this, there's always a group of people who just attach themselves to this like a religion, and they start to say that, oh, this is the one true way and you have to do everything in the data-oriented way, and if you're not doing that, you are an idiot, and so on. I mean, every new idea and concept eventually builds a weird propaganda outlet around itself like that for some reason. But I think there's a time and a place for those things, but I would consider them optimizations, because my concern about data-oriented design is that it's very easy to compromise on encapsulation, and I guess I'm maybe a bit old school, but I like object-oriented models where you have like nicely encapsulated objects that speak to each other, and as long as you don't compromise on encapsulation, I think it's fine to organize your data in a way that is better for caches. But if you start to sort of compromise your encapsulation and then you don't get any performance out of it anyway, then that's a bit silly. So for that reason, I guess it's a case-by-case thing. That's what I would say. So I wouldn't do everything like that up front. Just in the same way that you don't put everything into global variables up front. You know, there's a time and a place for a global variable, but if you make everything a global variable, then you're losing more than you're gaining, I think. Demonic Savage says, oh, speaking of mate, have you ever had the drink? Yes, my paternal grandparents used to have mate all the time, and I hated it. It was really hard to drink, but I was just a kid when I last tried. So I think it's mate and apple juice are those two things from my childhood that I remember as just really awful. And I haven't tried them in like 30 years because of that. So maybe I should give it a new chance, really, because me from 30 years ago had a different taste. JJ says, Andreas, what level of C++ skills should we have to contribute to Serenity? I see some familiar code, but there's also a lot of C++ that has changed since I used it long ago. I'm mostly a C guy. So what level of C++ skill you have today is largely irrelevant. You can pick up C++ as you go. I like to always bring this up, but we have many people in the project who did not know C++ at all when they started working on it. So, but they wanted so badly to hack on Serenity that they just decided, I'm just going to learn it as I go. And so I keep pointing to that because that can apply to anybody. And if you are already proficient in C, you'll be able to become productive in C++ and Serenity pretty quickly if you just put your mind to it. So it's just a matter of being curious and investigating what you find and talking to people about things you don't understand, like asking, hey, what does this do? How does this work? Right? And you can always try to figure out how things work, and you will learn a lot that way. And then, you know, try to make the changes that you're interested in, and put your pull request up for review. And then if something can be expressed in a much more C++-y way to take advantage of the language, then somebody will mention that. But code review is very, very helpful also for learning C++. So like, you try to do it as best you can, and then if there's some way that you can improve upon it, then we will talk about it in code review. Yuval says, were you ever recognized in public by one of your viewers? Not yet, I think. At least nobody ever told me that they recognized me in public. But I don't know. It's you have to remember that this is a field full of very introverted people who are not necessarily going to be like, oh, hey, I know you from YouTube. So it's possible that somebody recognized me somewhere, but nobody ever made it known. The idea of that is a bit scary, but I guess it's also a bit fun, because ultimately I don't have anything to hide, and I'm very much at peace with myself. In the past, I would have been terrified if people would recognize me for any reason. But nowadays, it doesn't scare me in the same way. Of course, you know, if a bunch of people showed up at the door, I would probably not enjoy that. But yeah, it hasn't happened yet. I'll let you know when it does. Streamer Games says, do you have any go-to techniques other than using profilers for optimizing performance? Or is that pretty much always the starting point? That's always where I start. I used to try different techniques in the past, like I would maybe time things. So like put in some code that prints out like, oh, this function started running, this function ended, and then print out how long it took, things like that. But the more I learned about using profilers, the less I use other techniques, I guess. Because profilers are just so powerful. Let's see. Paul says, I love the Serenity profiler. I just started using it since I wanted to get one of my school projects building on Serenity anyway, but I never used another profiler since, or even researched profilers. I definitely recommend learning more than one profiler. So depending on what operating system you're on, there's going to be a different profiler. The one called Instruments on macOS is really good. That's the one that the UI of Serenity's profiler is sort of based on. On Linux, profilers are not as pleasant as on macOS, I guess, but they're still powerful. You can use the perf utilities. And on Windows, I have no idea. Paul says, I'm using JetBrains Mono as well, but those combined greater than or equal symbols don't work for me. I think you have to enable ligature support. So let's see, ligatures. Yes, here. You have to clickety-clack on that guy if you want to see those fancy things. So you can see over here as an example, this divided by assignment operator. If I enable ligatures, then it will schnoink together like that. And we have all these other guys as well. yeah, there's so many examples, and I just hyper focus on that one for some reason. Yeah, so just click that checkbox and it should work. Let's see. German WTB says, speaking of caching, specifically in relation to OOP, have you ever come across or thought about making caching at the object level declarative instead of writing the member var setter getter? I'm not exactly sure how that would look. So I guess I haven't come across it. Krister Lind says, one could say you've become quite fond of JetBrains Mono. I guess so. My God, that's a bit strong. All right. Comfortably Numb says, as a browser developer, are you sometimes annoyed of the amount of ads and other JS bling on the web? Not really, because I use an ad blocker. So I don't see them. I think browsing without an ad blocker at this stage of the web's life is just kind of silly and irresponsible. And, you know, if you don't use an ad blocker and you turn it on, it's like buying a new computer, basically. Like, I really feel like that. Like, if I turn off my ad blocker, it's as if I'm using a computer from 4 years ago. And it's wild how much it bogs down your browser with all of the extra crap that it's doing. And it's just so much stuff going on. And that's also kind of the reason that for the SerenityOS browser, I decided that we're just going to bake in an ad blocker by default, because unlike every other browser, we don't have any contractual obligation to anybody, right? We're not beholden to anybody, so that we can't just put an ad blocker in there. So it seems like an obvious thing to have. And I mean, even like ship with a default filter list and stuff. Let's see. Blitzpark says, what's your view on writing a Wayland compositor? I have no clue. I have never tried to do it. I have no idea how to do it. I mean, I could probably figure it out, just like you, but I don't have a view or opinion about it. Colin Bell says, every new idea builds a weird propaganda outlet like that. Really speaking to the nature of memes there. They're just trying to replicate. I guess so. Yeah. Like, I mean, memes do replicate through people communicating them, right? The trouble is sometimes where people get very zealous about the particular meme that they are trying to replicate, and they can become a bit obnoxious about it. It's really strange how, I mean, I have primarily experience in the technical field, right? So I mostly know about programming memes. I wonder if it's like this in every field, but it really seems to me that people who are convinced that they have a technically superior solution can become extremely unpleasant about pushing it onto other people. And I always feel like they're doing such a disservice to whatever technology they want other people to try out, because by acting like a jerk about some technology that you think is great, you just I don't know, you're creating all these negative associations with that technology, and it seems like that's counter to what you were trying to do. But I don't know, it's something probably I've probably participated in this myself a lot, certainly in the past, about things like open source, you know, being like a real jerk about it, and like trying to make fun of people for using proprietary software and things like that, like we did when I was a teenager. spelling Microsoft with a $sign for the S, and other such strong memes. Alex Gravener says, if you ever find interest to learning about hardware, Ben Eater has lots of great content to start. Yeah, Ben Eater's channel is really cool. I love the way it looks. I never made it more than 10 minutes into any of his things, but those 10 minutes were usually really interesting. It's one of those things that's in the back of my mind. It's like, get Ben Eater's breadboard kit and just do his, what is it, a 6502 computer or something like that. Yeah, Ben Eater, definitely a cool channel. If people don't know about Ben Eater, I definitely gotta recommend that to check that out. You will definitely enjoy Ben Eater. Oh wow, look at his channel. It's getting real big. Very cool. Very well-deserved success. Vishnu says, opinion on pair programming. So I think pair programming is really cool. And I think it doesn't have to be limited to programming, though. I like to do pair profiling, pair debugging, I guess. But if you imagine that all of those fall under pair programming, yeah, I think pair programming is awesome. But I don't think you should be doing it all the time. I feel like pairing should be... pairing is best when it's a rare thing, but that you do somewhat regularly. And I do it a few times a month myself. And I think it can be very useful. But I especially love pair profiling. I think pair profiling is the funnest thing ever, to just pair with somebody who knows some piece of code as well as you, or maybe better than you, or worse than you. It doesn't matter if you have a discrepancy in how well you know the code, but just pairing with somebody to profile together and look at performance issues is so much fun. Oh my goodness. Like, I would definitely recommend that if you have to do any kind of performance work, to try to do it together with a coworker or somebody who's working on the same thing as you. Electric Milk says, my favorite monospace font is Consolas, especially its italic that is used in comments. Consolas, that's the Microsoft one, right? Consolas. Part of the ClearType font collection. Look at those Ks. I never know if I like this type of K or not. I always feel like this, the curve on the top of the thing here is a bit weird. Since you mentioned the italics, I guess you do like that one, but that's a little bit weird to me. It's a good looking font though, or a good looking typeface. Guilherme says, here's a totally non-controversial question about licenses. Do you agree with people who claim permissive licenses such as MIT, Apache, and BSD do more harm than good to open source, aka the GPL zealots? No, I don't agree with the GPL zealots. I think the GPL does like observably more damage, if you want to call it that, or more harm than good to open source, because there are countless things that are GPL licensed that companies don't use or can't use because of it. And they end up having to build their own, often inferior solutions, just because somebody insisted on using the GPL for something instead of something more permissive. I'm very pragmatic about that. I think that if you really care about getting software into as many hands as possible, then a permissive license dramatically increases the availability of your software. But if you are more concerned about maintaining control of that software, or that the software remains available in its modified forms, then I guess, yes, the GPL does have that feature, but the GPL also, in my experience at least, working at many companies where we were unable to use GPL software, the GPL just creates a lot of unnecessary work where people have to re-implement functionality that is already available just because of the GPL. But that's just my personal opinion from working at places like that. I know a lot of people feel differently, but that's, from what I've seen, it seems like permissive licenses just make software available to real people in real situations. Jungjin Park said, when someone inevitably decides to try and self-host Serenity, would you like to see a compiler that only compiles the relatively sane subset of C++ that Serenity uses? I mean, sure, I would like to see that. That would be fun to see. But it's not something that's being actively worked on right now. But I would like to see it, sure, someday. Maybe I would like to do it too. I don't know. And who knows if we will be using C++ 10 years from now. That remains to be seen. I think if we were going to build like a compiler, a full-on compiler, then would C++ still be the best choice for a language to compile? Maybe. I mean, at the moment, yes, but who knows in the future? I don't know. It's hard to say. But yes, I would like to see it. Evan Kai says, how are you? Pay attention to safety during the epidemic. I am perfectly fine and safe as far as I can tell. Thank you for asking. Vishnu says, what do you think a new language standard library have at the least? Is strings, files, basic data structure, etc. enough? I definitely think that a smaller standard library is better. I'm a big fan of extremely minimal standard libraries. I think the C++ standard library is way bigger than what I need. And I don't care to use the STL at all, basically. I know a lot of people like it, but to me, it always seemed like an unfortunate distraction for the language, because you have all of these people who are working on the C++ language, and they spend all of this time working on the C++ standard library, that they could also spend on improving the core language and make the standard library into a separate thing from that. But I know many people feel differently. I personally think language is better if it has a very, very minimal standard library. Mitchell Bumgarner says, do you have any advice for getting better at thinking like a senior programmer when laying out the design of a project? Inheritance versus composition, class structures, etc. I'm struggling with that stuff. Well, I guess the best advice that I ever got in that area was when you're trying to build something new, then try to sketch it out in pseudocode or in code that it doesn't have to actually do anything. But if you're going to write a new program that, I don't know, fetches email, for example, you can start writing the program. Just imagine that there's nothing here. So you can start out by thinking like, okay, so what does an email program have? Well, I guess it has a bunch of accounts configured. So you would start to write out your code like, okay, so imagine that I get my accounts from somewhere. Maybe I can loop over them. So I can say for auto account in my account manager, all accounts. And then maybe I would do something like if account cannot authenticate. Or maybe, wait, even better. Auto server. It's going to be account server. And then if we cannot connect to the server, then return some kind of error. I don't know. And so on. And if we cannot authenticate with the account credentials, return error, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I mean, you get the idea of what I'm doing, right? Like, it's just writing out some code that looks like real code, but these functions and classes don't exist yet. I'm just sort of typing out the flow of what I want my program to do. And then I can go and create all of these objects and functions, and they don't have to do anything yet, but I can sort of create them anyway, just so I have my program can actually compile and run, even though it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. The outline of it looks like the final program might end up looking. This technique has allowed me to build so many different things because it is really powerful. And that's one of the great things about abstraction, is that you can write an outline of something using an incomplete abstraction or an unimplemented abstraction, because the abstraction is still there. It just does nothing yet. Yeah, this is definitely how I would think about laying out projects. Just start by doing stuff like this. And it's recursive as well, right? So in order to connect, then maybe you would look at implementing a server function that has something like email server connect, and then maybe that thing will try to do something. So like if resolve DNS doesn't work, then return false, and if connect to server doesn't work, return false, and then maybe whatever you want to do in your connect function. But essentially, like, just digging into each one of these things until you have recursed so many times that you get to a level of abstraction where you can start to actually implement some of these steps. And then you just work your way up until you have implemented all of this functionality, and then, God willing, your program will just run, in theory, if you did everything right. Somebody showed me this once at Apple, and I just fell in love. I thought it was such an impressive technique for writing new programs, to just start with high-level abstracted, but still C++ code, and then recursively go and implement these abstractions layer by layer, until you get to the innermost level, and then actually implement something, and then work your way back up. Hope that makes sense. Lore says, hello from Italy. The other day I managed to port one of my university projects to Serenity. There seemed to be some bugs when running on Serenity, but I'm still happy with the result. Well, I'm happy about that too. The bugs might be in your software, it might be in Serenity, but if you keep poking at it, I'm sure you can figure out which one it is. Krista Lynn says, so you can download more RAM with an ad blocker. You absolutely can. The ad blocker, I think ad blockers are the closest thing to downloading more RAM that you will ever get. It's really like downloading more RAM and a new CPU. It's wild what a difference it makes. Ewan says, people should still consider, if they're able, to try and support sites/creators directly that may rely on ad revenue to survive. Sure, and I think so too. And but it shouldn't be forced on people, right? If you want to support online creators, online content that you enjoy, then there's some other way to do that. Like I have GitHub sponsors, Patreon, PayPal. You can become a member of the channel on YouTube now. There's all these different options, none of which rely on me pushing megabytes of untrusted code that your browser has to run. It's just such a terrible monetization model, I think. Just because it works doesn't mean it's good. And I always tell people, please use an ad blocker when watching my videos. I don't want you to sit and have a crappy computer just so that you see ads on my content if you want to support me. I would much rather you have an ad blocker, don't see ads on my content, and if you want to, you can support me in some other way. But don't force yourself to have such a terrible web experience when you can just not. Samu698 says, "Hello, Andreas. I was curious if the Serenity browser can run on Linux and if it would be feasible to do it. So currently it does not run directly on Linux. There is an ongoing project. The latest, let's find it. I think maybe it's on page 2 here, or maybe even page 3, maybe page 4. What the heck? Oh, no, I'm searching for the wrong thing. Headless. This is what I wanted. Yeah. So Dex started this project of making the browser run on Linux, and the first version of that doesn't have the whole browser. It's just a headless version, which allows you to take a screenshot of a page, but entirely on Linux. So here he has been running Acid 3 on Linux and taking a screenshot of it, and basically I guess you get a PNG file from it, but it's the start. So that's sort of where we're at right now. I know this is a big pull request, and there's a bunch of feedback on it that Dex didn't get back to yet, but it's an area where there's some exciting development happening, so definitely feasible. We'll see when it happens. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. People saying what fonts they like. Yes. Axel says, where did you like to work, or on what, if Serenity didn't exist? I don't know. Maybe I would work on some kind of web browser. I enjoy working on web browsers, so I'd probably do something like that. But who knows? I might also like to work with animals, or possibly children. It would be fun to be a kindergarten teacher, maybe. I have no idea. Breadhead23 says, "Hey Andreas, y'all got any more of those videos? The abstinence is getting real." Yeah, it's been a while since I made a hacking video now. I have been very, very tired the last couple of weeks, and slipped a little bit out of my regular video making habit, and I have a bunch of videos that I want to make now, so now I'm just waiting for that burst of energy to come and push me into making it. So definitely happening soon. But I don't know, after the Acid 3 test passed, I had like all of this tension build up, and when I finally got the test passing, I just let go of the tension and I became so tired. And I guess I've been relaxing a little bit since then, not pushing myself to make videos and things. But even relaxation comes to an end where you get eager to do stuff again, and I do feel like I'm on my way back to feeling eager about it. Let's see. Abhishek says, "In big companies like Fang, what I have observed is most of engineers' time goes in collecting requirements, talking to people from other teams, arguing on whether to do a particular feature or not, etc. There is so little hands-on tech work that happens. What are your thoughts on this? Is it just my team doing this? And if no, is there a way out?" So I think that's definitely something that happens, but it's not necessarily happening everywhere. I think every company has teams that operate like that, but they also have many teams that don't. I worked my time in Fang was at Apple, and my teams, like the Safari and the WebKit teams, were both very, very efficient, very sort of laser focused on what they were trying to do, and we didn't have this problem at all of time disappearing into meta programming meta tasks. It was all like, it was always clear what you're supposed to be doing, how you can improve the product, and where you can add your piece of the pie. But I also interacted with other teams where people were sort of bogged down with the less technical tasks. And I guess one of those tasks for them was like talking to me and listening to what problems I was having with their framework. It's tricky when if you're working on something like a component that's used by many other teams, then it's just kind of a necessary evil that you have to make time to listen to all those teams and see what they want to do with your thing and why your thing isn't currently good enough. And it's just part of it. So I think you can sort of organize your team so that becomes less of a burden on engineers, though. I don't have any management experience in Fang, so I can't really speak to that. But my understanding as a casual observer or as an employee observer was always that the purpose of program managers is to coordinate these things and offload engineers so that engineers don't spend all of their time collecting requirements and talking to people from other teams and blah blah blah, right? That's what program managers are supposed to be doing. So if they're not doing that and your engineers are spending all their time on that, then maybe you need better program managers, or maybe you don't have them at all and you need them, or I don't know. But at Apple, at least, we had really good program managers, and they were hiding all of that stuff from us, I suppose, which we really appreciated. And of course, to be fair, I did find it personally frustrating when I wanted something from another team and I had to talk to their program manager instead of talking to the engineer responsible. But I also did recognize that the opposite was true. When somebody wanted to talk to me, then they first had to talk to my closest PM, which was good. So yeah, my understanding is that program managers are the solution to that problem, but I don't know enough about it to really have a nuanced opinion. Michaela says, related to OSS licenses, I think the argument in favor of GPL is that large companies can't benefit off of free labor. People who use it specifically because they don't want companies, like you mentioned, to have access. Right, yeah, of course. And people are free to use the GPL if they want to exclude companies from benefiting from the free labor that they put into making that software. I just think that that's a different type of person than what I am. I can't really relate to it. I make open source software because I want anybody to be able to have it. I want anybody to be able to do whatever with it. Because when I was growing up and learning about programming, there was very little software that I could get my hands on, like source code that I could get my hands on. So whenever I got my hands on the code for something, I thought, wow, this is amazing. I can see the code. And I would just dig through it and try to learn as much as possible about it. And I didn't know about the whole open source world back then when I was a kid. But that always stuck with me, like this feeling that if you can see the code, that's like the greatest thing ever. And I have a hard time relating to somebody who would say, oh, these people can use the code, but these other people can't. I just want everybody to have the code. And I don't care what they want to do with it. And yeah, so I think it's just a fundamental philosophical difference between people, and I just happen to be on one side of that because of my own personal experience, feeling so happy about being able to get access to code as a kid. Vishnu says, is it possible to write a compiler that compiles with C++ standard now? I don't really understand the question, but I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. Mateus says, what is the license of the ext2 implementation? How did you manage to implement the file system without contaminating the project with the GPL? What do you mean? The file system? The file system is just a layout and data structures, like disk layout. Like, it doesn't... I don't understand the question. Like, we're not using the ext2 implementation from Linux. We're just implementing the same, we're implementing a parser for the same file system layout, I guess. Evan Kai says, will you read a lot source code and tend to learning? Which open source software do you think have the best code taste? Any recommended source code? Well, I'm very biased, so I think SerenityOS has very nice code taste. I always thought that WebKit has very nice code taste. It's a very, like, most of my own personal style comes from WebKit and then, you know, has evolved after that. But a lot of what I still like and really value comes from there, like using like really long and descriptive identifiers and not worrying about horizontal space, just like make things verbose and understandable instead of trying to be terse and clever. So I think WebKit has really good code taste, but I think SerenityOS is even nicer. Mitchell says, thank you very much for the advice. I really like the idea of starting with a non-working abstracted layer and then building the inner stuff to make that work after. That seems very logical. Yeah, dude, when I first saw that and tried using it myself, I felt like I had learned a magic trick or a magic spell or something because it's so stupidly effective. So I definitely recommend trying it. Let's see. Samu says, what do you think about const expert? Recently, I saw a PR about using a bit field instead of string in the pledge syscall, and I thought that parsing the string at compile time would be a solution. Sure, that is a possible solution. You can definitely do things at compile time. In general, I think whatever you can do at compile time instead of runtime, you should try to do it at compile time. But there are limits to what you can conveniently do at compile time, of course. Even if something is technically doable at compile time, you may have to write like a complex code generator because you can't always do everything with const expert. You can do a lot with it, but one thing that that I think frustrates a lot of people about C++ in particular is the lack of static reflection, where you can't really introspect the types to the extent that you would like many times. And I would love to be able to enumerate all the member variables of a type, for example, of a struct type, and do something to each one of them. And I know that the circle language is sort of exploring things like that, but it's a little bit too experimental and wacky for my taste. But anyway, I guess, yes, I like const expert. I think the more we can do at compile time, the better, but we shouldn't push ourselves to doing really unpleasant things just so that we can do stuff at compile time. We should find a happy, healthy medium. Andrew Castor says, collecting data from other teams about how they want to use the stuff my team writes is over 50% of my time as an engineer. Oh, Andrew. Andrew is the closest thing to Dilbert that I have ever met. He's always telling us about his Dilbert-like work conditions. Very interesting. And I'm not surprised, Andrew, to hear that from you. Do you not have program managers in government? I don't know if they do. Maybe they don't. Gillian says, hi, about manager relaying requirements and stuff. How is that organized in Serenity? Is it organic enough at your point of view? Oh, it's completely organic. I mean, there are no managers in Serenity. Nor are there really any requirements other than what you bring yourself to the table. Whatever you want to do, that's what you end up doing. So completely organic, yes. Vishnu says, is it possible to write a C++ compiler now, like how you SerenityOS community made a browser? Yeah, of course you can make a C++ compiler. You can make any software. Like any software that has already been done once by humans can be done again. There is no software that you can't write again, right? Everything that humans have done, humans can do again. And I think in many ways, it's easier today to do a lot of things that were harder in the past. And people often think that because some things have gotten more complex, it must be harder to do them. But I think, for example, JavaScript is a good example of this. I would say it was harder to make a JavaScript engine 10 years ago than it is today, because today the JavaScript specification from ECMA is so freaking good. Like, it's so detailed and so good that it's much easier to make a really good JavaScript engine, and a compatible one especially. That was really a big challenge in the past, that if you wanted to build a compatible JavaScript engine, first you had to implement whatever the spec said, and then you had to also figure out what are the other implementations of JavaScript doing, like what's IE doing, what's Firefox doing, what's Chrome doing, and what's Safari doing, and so on. And then you had to mimic those behaviors as well. But nowadays, like, all of that is actually defined by the specification, so it's easier. And I haven't looked at C++ as a language to try to implement it, but it seems likely to me that it would be easier today than to do it in the past. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that. Let's see. Alex K says, I think it's great that you take time off from making videos when you need it. I saw many great content creators announce big plans for more frequent videos and then just disappear completely due to too much pressure. Yeah, so that's one reason that I never announce plans or even make plans, because I feel like if I announce plans, then I just create pressure for myself that I could also just not do. And just adding pressure to life seems unnecessary. And it's not like, I don't feel like having some big plan creates any value for viewers of this channel. Like, if I make the videos, then that's the value. Me saying, oh, I have a plan to do this and that has no value. Like, the value is in what I put out, right? So I don't know about that. Bus says, hi Andreas, hope you're doing great today. I am. Hope you're doing great too, Bus. Nobody is perfect at everything. What do you think is your weakness in coding? Ooh, I definitely agree with that. Nobody is perfect. I have many weaknesses in coding. I think, let's see, what's an obvious weakness that I have? I can sometimes, very often I sort of get tunnel visioned on a specific part of a code base, and I stop thinking about how that part interacts with other parts of the system. So I think that, oh, I'm just fixing this thing, and my test case is the only thing that uses any of this functionality, and I forget to think about, like, how do other parts of the system interact with this part. That's something that happens to me quite often, especially when I'm working on the web browser, where I fix some issue in CSS layout, for example, and now this one little test page that I have looks better, but maybe on google.com something is now totally jumbled because of something I didn't think about. I feel like I often get, yeah, I guess that's what I would say. I get tunnel vision on a specific scenario, and I forget to consider other ways that this code can be used. And I have many weaknesses, just like everybody does, just like everybody does, yeah. That's just one that annoyed me recently. Weakness. I almost feel like I want to sit down and just write down my weaknesses and make a list of them. Maybe I should do that, but not here right now with you watching me, but but I think maybe that would be a healthy exercise for me. Oh, oops. Let's see. Dun, 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 dun. John McCurdy says, "Hi Andreas, do you ever regret others comparing or criticizing your work on the basis that it has been done before?" Oh, I don't care. That doesn't matter to me. I'm aware that things have been done before, you know? I know that this is not the first operating system in the world that we're building here. I'm aware that there are browsers, so the fact that we're building another one, even though other browsers exist, I'm okay with that, you know? So these people who criticize SerenityOS, saying that like, oh, well, they're just doing stuff that's been done before, we all know that. You know, that's not a surprise. And it's not really, it's strange to me that somebody would think that that's a criticism even worth opening your mouth about. But I'm not here to tell people what they can and can't open their mouth about. It's just curious to me that somebody would think it's something worth saying. Buzz says, except Doom's fast inverse square root. That cannot be done again. That wasn't code, that was sorcery. Yeah, I hear this often, but this is actually not true at all. It can absolutely be done again, and it can even be done better. I remember seeing a blog post about that. I think it's this one, where he explains exactly how it works. And if I recall correctly, or maybe it's not that one. There's some blog post somewhere where somebody finds a better number. So they describe exactly how it works, and then how you can sort of bisect your way to an even more suitable number. So it's a very well understood piece of magic at this point. But people often use that as an example of things that you can't replicate, but you absolutely can. Sky Rising says Wikipedia has the better constants. Yes, I'm sure they do. Yeah. But yeah, this like I mean, I'm not saying this to like criticize what you're saying. I just it's something that I've heard from many people, that this cannot be done. This is magic, and it's really not. It's just a neat trick, like so many other neat tricks that exist. And it's cool that we live in a time where we have the resources to dig into these tricks, and we can learn about them and improve upon them. Let's see. Not the other one says, I never knew how satisfying it could be to make your own containers, general functions, etc. like Act does. Thanks for showing me the fun way instead of using stud for everything. Well, I'm glad you see it as the fun way. I definitely agree that it's a lot of fun to make your own containers, and I really like how it allows you to choose exactly the type of behavior that you want, exactly the type of API that you want, and it just opens up a different way of enjoying programming compared to like tying yourself to somebody else's API and then being forced to do things the way that API says you got to do it. In Serenity, we have this lovely environment where we can do things our way. And if something doesn't feel right or something doesn't work well, then we can change it. It's a very liberated form of programming, and it's very enjoyable, I think. Axel says, did you go to uni? And if so, what courses were the favorites? I did not go to uni. I dropped out of high school, actually. I did not finish the last year of high school, so don't really have any favorite uni courses. Let's see. Abhishek says, what is your terminal's color scheme? You mean my Mate terminal? I don't know. Colors, custom. Oh, Tango. I guess it's Tango. That's Tango that comes with Ubuntu. Henderson says, I have a problem to balance the other people's opinions and mine. Well, that can be hard. That's why it's good to discuss with people about things, have conversations, and try to admit when you are wrong, or when somebody has like a better point than you do, to try to learn to be graceful about it and say like, okay, yeah, I think you're right about that. I struggled so much with admitting that I was wrong about something, or saying that somebody else had a better idea than I did. It took me many, many decades before I could do that. But it's really worth doing. And I think when you become comfortable admitting that you're wrong, and when you become comfortable conceding that somebody else's approach to something is better than what you had in mind, it becomes a lot easier to balance your opinions and other people's opinions, because you're not fanatically married to your own opinions. And ultimately, the truth matters a lot more than anyone's opinion. So if we make our pursuit about the truth rather than about being right or wrong, then everything is a lot easier. Let's see. Axel says, on the topic of fast inverse square root, have you dabbled in graphics programming? I really enjoy it. Sure. I've done a little bit of graphics programming, and it's not really my favorite thing, but I do enjoy some of it, I guess. Like yesterday, I wrote I wrote a really, really crappy implementation of rasterizing a bitmap through an affine transform. So for the canvas, the 2D canvas context in libweb, we need to be able to draw bitmaps even if the canvas context has a 2D transform on it. And we didn't support that. So I wrote this really fugly thing here that works, but definitely needs some efficiency improvements, where we now take the destination rect where you want to paint, and then we warp it through the transform on the context, and then we go through all of the pixels in the transformed destination rectangle and find a suitable sample point in the source image and blit that. It's it's a whole thing here, but yeah, it was graphics programming. I enjoyed it, I guess. I do that sometimes, but I feel like I'm not, I haven't put enough time into graphics programming to feel good at it, and that frustrates me sometimes. So I do need to put more time into it. There's just so many different things that I can put time into. Let's see. Valtteri says, I thought what they meant was that hardware floating point is faster these days, so the trick isn't needed anymore. Therefore, that particular bit of code can't happen, i.e. be useful anymore. Oh, well, that is a very charitable interpretation, so I should probably have considered that as well. I like the way you think. Buzz says, as a sequel to my last question, what do you think is your biggest strength in programming? Oh, my biggest strength in programming, I think for sure, is that I don't listen to anybody who says that it can't be done. I don't care what people think is impossible, and I am not afraid to do things that are going to take a really long time. I think a lot of cool projects get they die because people get intimidated by when they realize how much work it's gonna take or how much time it's gonna take. And I don't know if it's something is wrong with me or whatever, but I see it as a power or superpower that I'm not afraid of time and effort. I got time. I don't mind putting in the work. So that really opens up a lot of things that we can do. Like if you're willing to put in time and effort, you can build anything, anything that hasn't been done before, and a lot of things that haven't been done before we can do. And I like to imagine that is my biggest strength. Vishnu says, is it okay to use the operating system's malloc for creating your own containers, or do you have to create your own allocator on top of malloc? So I guess it depends on what kind of container you're making. If you're making an intrusive container, then obviously you shouldn't be using any kind of allocator. If you're making a non-intrusive container, then typically you want to use an allocator. You can make a container that takes an allocator as a parameter. So to a container that allows complete customization of allocation. But many containers are just implemented by calling malloc. That's how a bunch of them in Serenity work as well. Like our ACK containers, like vector, like hash map, and various other containers, they call malloc. But we also have intrusive containers that don't. Let's see. Jack says, on Ubuntu, what is your package manager? Yes, indeed, as John says, is apt. Apt. Flo Writes Code says, just checking in to say hi. Also, what mic are you using? I recently got a Rode NT-USB for my videos and future streams, and I really like it so far. So this is a Blue Yeti USB microphone that I'm using, and it is pretty good, although it does pick up a bit too much noise from my computer fan, but I don't know that another mic would do a better job. It's possible. But I'm pretty happy with it so far. Let's see. Buzz says, if you could in an instant fix or complete a feature that is on the to-do list for Serenity, what would you choose and why? I don't know. I don't think I would do anything instantly. I would because I enjoy the process. I mean, I started the whole project because I wanted to work on stuff. So the idea of snapping my finger and having something automatically finished, that doesn't really appeal to me. As painful as it is sometimes to do difficult features or heavy features, I still really enjoy going through the process. So I would say nothing. MD says, hello, how do you manage multiple projects that may interest you at the same time? How do you assign priorities? Well, I usually just do whatever is the single most interesting thing at the time. It's a bit weird, but it works for me. So out of the sort of high value tasks that I feel I have that I want to do, I try to just pick whichever one is the most interesting and then focus on that. So it's a big mix of things, and I never know in the morning what I'm going to be working on in the afternoon, but so far it works. So hoping to keep that up. Let's see. Max Joker says, you should have a look at some shader toy demos. They are awesome to look at and also cool programs. Yeah, there are lots of cool things on shader toy. Somebody even made the SerenityOS ladybug, lady ball as a shader toy demo somewhere. That was very neat. I'm using it as a Discord emote all the time. Let's see. Satusin says, have a good weekend, Andreas, and everyone. Have a good weekend, you too, Morgan. Nice to see you here. Timo says, I fell asleep listening to this stream shortly after it began and just woke up. It was a good nap. Well, that's good. That's good. I listen to similar streams sometimes when I go to sleep. Like, I was listening to Ross Scott the other day when I was going to sleep. The Accursed Farms guy. He has this like monthly office hours like stream. By the way, this channel is so... I love this channel so much. He just talks about kind of obscure games and make these little mini documentaries about them. Super awesome channel. I gotta shout out Ross Scott. Let's see. Lawrence says, how's the quest for Discord coming? It's been going okay. We got a little bit distracted with other CSS issues, and I've been meaning to come back to Discord once I fix up all the things I wanted to with CSS. So there aren't really any new developments in that area to report on. Matthias says, you are a very inspirational person, Andreas. I'm glad to have found your channel, and I found your videos interesting even if I don't code. Well, that's nice to hear. Thank you, Matthias. Glad you enjoy the videos even if you don't code. JJ says, with your browser creation as a noob, I'm curious how you handle creating the support for HTML and CSS and how you handle creating support for using JavaScript. Is creating a JavaScript engine a challenge? Well, of course. That is a challenging thing, but you can totally do it. And you can, in fact, I'm searching for why. You can see where it all started, JavaScript engine. The very first video I made where I literally like broke ground on the JavaScript engine. If you haven't seen it, might be interesting. 600 people, can't be wrong. No idea how many people dislike it. But yeah, that's when I started building it, and I think seeing how it starts from nothing can be very educational if you haven't seen something like that before. Satusin says, little off topic, but just wanted to say while I'm here, I'm at 9 weeks this weekend, Andreas. I'm feeling good. 9 weeks? That's awesome. Congratulations, dude. That is, that's good work. Just keep at it. And I think you're in the clear now. That's good. John McGurdy says, I love how you sometimes subconsciously select the cat in your wallpaper. Yes. I suppose I do that. I can't help it, okay? It's just a silly habit. Valtteri says, I also woke up from a nap 20 minutes ago. The office hours happen at prime Friday nap time for me. Yeah, for me too. I haven't had my Friday nap in a long time. Speaking of Friday naps, though, I gotta go. So we are shutting down office hours. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for the people who joined as a channel member today. Really appreciate the support. And of course, everybody just for hanging out. It has been another lovely office hours. I love that we're still doing these. I love that people come here and chat. And we get such a curious range of topics every time. Really appreciate that. So, as I always like to say, if you end up working on SerenityOS this weekend, then please come hang out on Discord and tell us what you're working on. Maybe share some screenshots because it's so much fun to see. And outside of that, I'm going to see you all next time. So have a great weekend. Bye.